Namaste to everybody. Today we are in the Swayam course for yoga for IQ development, and the module we are going to discuss today is assessment of intelligence, and we are in the part 2 session of it. So hope you all remember what we had discussed in our previous module, that is assessment of intelligence part 1. So we had an overview about the various different kinds of intelligence assessment, the IQ tests, which were both individual tests and the names of the group tests. So we had seen Stanford Binet, Binet-Simon revised versions. We had seen Wechsler's scale for adults and children, also the Kaufman test. So having discussed all that, now today our discussion is all about the group intelligence test. So the tests which we discussed in the previous module were all given for individuals alone. So it was to check the intelligence scores or the intelligence quotient of an individual in a very subjective way. We conducted only for one person at a time. But now, if we have to assess a greater population, a larger population, we need to cover up a good lot of same class of people, and you have to choose best among them. Individual tests may not work, or it might consume a lot of time. Say for example, you need to pick bright students from a class of 100. You can't keep a test individually for one person, which might consume say 45 minutes for an individual. So for 100 students, you can imagine how much of time it consumes. So in these cases, we require group test, where the test can be administered at a stretch, and from the scores you can pick the best amongst that bigger population. So here again we have various tests which were developed, which were revised, and are still in the process of development, because based on the needs from the day-to-day development, evolution, the generation which are coming in the future years, we need to think based on their thought process, their IQ development, the nurturing method, etc. So in all these regards, we have so many tests which are evolving in everyday basis. So amongst these, the most important ones, the ones which are very popularly used, and ones those are culture free and culture fair, would be discussed in today's module. So here, before we enter deep into the group tests of intelligence, we will see a small trivia about intelligence, just for tickling your funny bone. So here in the ancient period, there was a dialogue between Indra and Brihaspati in Mahabharat with Yudhishthir and Yaksh. So these two dialogues were considered to be kind of intelligence test. So this is how intelligence was assessed in ancient period, because they didn't have intelligence assessment test or brain imaging techniques, or to find the volume of the brain tissues, the cortex, the white matter, grey matter, nothing was there. So those days, how they measured intelligence was between dialogues, arguments. They have question answer sessions between intelligent people, and then they assess whether the person is smart or not. So you would have seen these even in the folk tales and stories of Tenali Rama, Akbar, Birbal. So here it is all about how they practically finish a problem or practically deal with something which is very tricky. So this is how their intelligence was measured, rather than giving them some assessment test or questionnaire or task to complete. Then in the medieval age, once the ancient period was gone and there was some improvement in the scientific development, where we were able to see the organs inside, we were able to see the images of our body, then they confined intelligence development based on the skull measurement. So the skull was measured, bigger skull, more the intelligence, lesser skull, less the intelligence. So that was there in the medieval age. And then later on, with all the development, the science coming into place, and we have a lot of scientists, psychologists, researchers, then in the modern era, we started with the system of assessment test, not just for intelligence, but for all the other parameters of behavior or personality development, motivation, emotion, etc. So currently, we are in the modern era, and so we have n number of assessment tests, both for individual and group evaluation of intelligence. So, and today we are going to discuss about the group test in particular. So, this group tests it can be both verbal and non-verbal, not just group test, even the individual test, because not everybody can undergo a verbal test. Now you imagine you want to find the intelligence level in geriatric population, that is old age people. Not everybody are very literate, or not everybody knows the universal language English. So there might be so many obstacles, restrictions, where you will not be able to administer an intelligence test, thereby not able to understand their intelligence level. So here we need non-verbal tests as well, where literacy is not counted, their degrees, designations, qualification doesn't matter. To be even particular, it should be assessed even in deaf and dumb people. So here even a blind person's intelligence should be measured. So we should have a broad category of verbal tests and non-verbal tests to assess the intelligence. So all are individual tests and group tests. Few fall under verbal tests, where a paper pencil is required, where we need some writing to be done, whereas non-verbal test is not like that. We will have kind of block designs, puzzles, where you have to match the colors or something which is based on their general knowledge or even their fluid intelligence, not the crystallized intelligence. Hope you remember the two terminologies, fluid and crystallized intelligence. So this non-verbal test, or which does not require literacy or degrees, are called as performance test. So both individual test and group test will be further classified into verbal and non-verbal test. So in group test we have plenty of verbal and non-verbal tests. To have a overview of the characteristics of group test, the first thing is it can be administered to a large number of subjects, the major advantage of group test. Then subjects can read and write the language in the language of the test. So the languages can change and they can use their own language to interpret things, whether it is verbal or non-verbal. And the verbal test, basically it has a time limit, and in verbal test we require reading and writing. Whereas if you see non-verbal group test, it is again administered in a group like verbal test, and subjects who are illiterate, deficient in language can also attend the non-verbal test, not like verbal. And here in non-verbal group test, the test has the features of both group and non-verbal tests of intelligence. It will have all the features of both the tests, but still even the illiterate and language deficient people can undergo the group test, which are non-verbal. And to tell, now let me just name out the different assessment tests in group tests. So we have some important ones and some which are recently developing. It is the Army Beta test, Raven's progressive matrices, Cattell's culture free test, Bhatia's battery of performance test, Jalota's scale of intelligence, Pintner-Patterson scale of performance test, Desai's verbal group test of intelligence, CIE verbal group test of intelligence, and we have a Buddhi Parikshan test as well. So these assessment tests, few are developed from the Western psychology, few are Indian based as well. So few of these are again verbal, few are non-verbal, few are having both verbal and non-verbal components in their tests. So we won't be discussing in detail about all the tests which are really not required. So we would be seeing the most popular tests which are in existence today. So the first one we are going to discuss in today's module about group test is the Army Beta test. So when the term tells Army Beta test, you should be thinking, where is Army Alpha test? Yes, it started as Army Alpha test during before the World War, and it was given as a test to recruit army people. So after World War I, it was stopped out, and then the new one called Army Beta test came into existence, and this is the non-verbal complement of Army Alpha. Army Alpha was a verbal group test which was administered to recruit people, whereas Army Beta is also used to recruit people, but it is a non-verbal test. So here the grading is based on the scores they get on the different tests. So here in Army Beta test there are 7 sub-tests or 7 levels of tests. So the first test was tracing the path of a maze, which I think all of you would be very familiar with. Then there are cube analysis. So they provide a cube and remove one part of the cube and ask them, in this part how many squares can you find? So they have to imagine and place that spatial orientation should be there to understand what is a cube made of and how many squares can be placed in it, or how many smaller cubes can be placed in it. Then there are pattern analysis, code digiting a digit with symbol, number checking ability, pictorial completion ability, geometrical construction ability. So these 7 were the subtests of Army beta test, where people have to score in each of these. So each of the score from 7 tests would be added together and the final score would be given, and based on that they would be graded into A, B, C, D and E, where D and E are said to be a little lower than the normal intelligence level. So this was a test which was administered long before, and still they use it for army recruitment in some places, but it is not so commonly popularized among the other normal population. But why we mention this test is, this test was one of the tests which paved way for development of other advanced tests. So many other cognitive intelligence tests came from army test. Then the next test which is in popular use is Raven's progressive matrices. So Raven was the person who found this, and why it is called progressive and matrix. So all of you know what a matrix is. Matrix is a group of things which are confined to one particular component. So in that, say for example, one matrix contains 9 components, so serially arranged or in a pattern arranged. So 8 things are arranged in a pattern, and your job is to find out what would be the 9th pattern. So in the matrix, seeing the logic, we should be able to find out what is next. So that is why these tests are called as matrices. And why is it progressive? So it is like the video games which we use in day-to-day life, where there is level 1, level 2, level 3, where the difficulty levels would increase with each level. So Raven's progressive matrices are like that, where after you finish one round of the test, the next level is going to be little difficult. Once you finish or clear out that test, then the third level would be much more difficult. So this test is named as Raven's progressive, where the difficulty levels keep increasing and most of the questions are matrix based, hence called as Raven's progressive matrices. And this is a non-verbal ability test which is used to assess the abstract reasoning in an individual. And as I told you, the progressive questions get harder as the test progresses, and most of the time the question pattern is to determine the missing element in a pattern presented in the form of a matrix. So this test again was revised plenty of times. Initially it was called as Raven Standard Progressive Matrices. Then there was an addition to it which was called Raven Colored Progressive Matrices, because the first edition was all black and white. So to make it more attractive and more feasible, it was made as Raven Colored Progressive Matrices, where even children enjoy doing this test. And the third version of it was Raven Advanced Progressive Matrices, which contained both standard and colored blocks in it. And the last one which is currently used is Raven Standard Progressive Matrices Plus. So in short it was called as SPM, which had different sets with so many other advancement, etc. So basically this test is called as Raven Standard Progressive Matrices test, though the versions keep changing with passing years based on the requirement of the population. Now the third one. So we had completed 2 Army beta test and Raven's progressive matrices test. Now the third group test which we are going to discuss now is Cattell's culture free test. So the term here, culture free. Cattell, anyways, we are very familiar with the psychologist Cattell, who had given different theories of intelligence. What is culture free? You can call it either culture free or culture fair, both are correct. So culture free is, as we had discussed in our previous module, where the intelligence differ between cultures. Asians have different component of intelligence, Americans would have it differently, the Japanese would have intelligence measured in a different way, traditional intelligence is different, Western intelligence are different. So if you have to have a test which is standard for the whole world, it may not be so reliable because culture wise intelligence differ. So we should have a culture free test which should be applied to any individual. For everybody, irrespective of their culture, they should be able to answer the questions in a intelligent level itself, not influenced by their culture at all. Even the Raven's progressive matrices to an extent is culture free and culture fair. So in this test, Cattell's culture free test, the current version which we use is the 3rd edition, which is called as CFIT 3. And this here again, this can be done both in individual setting as well as group setting. Culture free test of Cattell is both an individual test as well as a group test. And this has 3 scales. Scale 1 is for children aged 4 to 8 and a little older, and people with mental handicaps, people who have some mental disabilities will be attending scale 1. Scale 2 are for children aged 8 to 14 as well as average adults, and scale 3 is for children aged 14 and above as well as adults of superior intelligence. So scale 3 is a little higher version or a harder version which is used for grown up children as well as adults who have exceptionally good intelligence. So based on this, they again have different tests like finding out what next, which pattern should come next, because this is a non-verbal element, and that is why this is used as a culture free and culture fair test. The last one, that is amongst the important tests, the last one which we are going to discuss today is Bhatia's battery of performance test. This is again a very well standardized and reliable tool in the Indian context. This is one which is widely used today, and this is done or this is developed for both literate and illiterate populations with separate norms. So you have a literate group, you need to conduct it among engineering students, then they have separate rules, whereas you wanted to see it in a tribal population who does not know what school is, then again you have separate norms for it and an illiterate battery of performance tests for them. And this has 5 sub-tests. Not all the 5 sub-tests were developed by Bhatia himself, but the sub-tests were developed from the main standard test. And one criticism about this test is it was originally developed for the 11 to 16 year age group, and this was standardized in boys alone. So that was one criticism which was told, but the justification which was given for that is at the age of 16, a kind of peak of intelligence is reached. So there is no much change after that. So 11 to 16, if you assess, it is kind of assessing the whole population. This was a kind of average justification which was given for this test, but they do administer it in adult and get good results as well. And each of the tests would take around 45 to 60 minutes, and the major advantage of this test, as I told you, is there is no culture bias. So if you see Raven's, Cattell, Bhatia, all these are culture bias-less tests where you can administer it into any population. You don't have to see their caste, you don't have to see their education level, their race, nothing. And the sub-tests of Bhatia, as I told you, we have 5 sub-tests. The first one is Coase block design test. The second one is Alexander Pass long test. The third is pattern drawing test. Fourth is immediate memory, and fifth is picture construction test. So all these had different ways of questioning. So they had block designs and asking them what next to come, and they had a pattern which was incomplete and the completion can be given by the person who is answering, and the immediate memory span of a person can be assessed. A picture's part would be given and they have to construct the picture based on their imagination. So all these were different sub-tests of Bhatia's performance test, and not everybody should undergo all the 5 tests. You can even divide it based on the requirement. So these 4 tests are in popular use: the Army Beta, the Raven's progressive matrices, Cattell's culture fair, and Bhatia's test. But we have few other tests which are developing day by day, which I had shown you in the beginning of the class itself, that we had so many tests like Jalota's, Pintner, Patterson, etc., which are again based on the same category of things like vocabulary, reasoning, patterns, filling up the diagrams or block designs, etc. So in this I will mention about two tests today. One is Jalota and the other one is Pittner-Patterson performance test. So this Jalota's test was developed in the year 1972, quite recently, and it has 5 tasks with 20 tasks each. So almost 100 tasks would be available in this Jalota's test. So here the 5 main tasks are vocabulary, classification, number series, analysis and reasoning. So each of this would have 20 tasks under their classification. So altogether 100 tasks. Coming to Pittner-Patterson performance test, this involves physical materials. So the original version had 15 subtests. So from there they had refined, and now I think almost 9 subtests are available. So they have a goat's picture, a human, which is all divided or broken into like a tangram, and they have to arrange the picture into a meaningful design. So this was Patterson's performance test, which can be administered even for children. I think in most of the schoolings today, in preschool and kindergarten, they use this method by way of having different blocks which are separated, and like a puzzle block, the child has to rearrange it into a meaningful picture. So how fast they do it, the intelligence level is scored based on that. So we have so many tests which are developed based on that particular population, like Desai's test, CIE, Buddhi Parikshan. All these are for the confined population based on their literacy levels. Different performance and verbal tests are given. So this covers up the overall assessment of intelligence. We started up with individual tests which had both verbal and non-verbal, and group test again which has both verbal and non-verbal. So almost all the important tests which are in popular use today we had discussed, starting from our Binet-Simon Stanford Binet test to the Wechsler's adult and children intelligence scale. Also we had seen the Kaufman's test, and coming to the group test, the most popular ones we have discussed regarding Raven's, Bhatia and Cattell's test. Army beta test, though it is very much confined to the army people, we learnt about it because this was the basis for all the other tests which were happening and the most of the tests which are developing even today. So all these tests based on the requirement, based on the population, can be administered to assess the intelligence of an individual, and the scoring would give you in which intelligence zone they are good at. Say, because we had seen intelligence is not just about the general intelligence, or it is not about certain specific factors alone. Gardner had given a broad view of almost 9 kinds of intelligence, starting from interpersonal, intrapersonal, existential, naturalistic, we had visual, spatial, so many things, logical reasoning. So based on the intelligence test, we can really find out which zone is your strength and which is your weakness, where you should work upon and become a complete individual with almost an above average intelligence. So this test, if taken up by yourself, can make you understand where you are in a weaker side, and it will help you through yoga mainly to come up with different procedures so that you enhance your intelligence in a very safe way. Now these tests, it is not just to assess the intelligence of an individual alone, but it is applied in the society for various purposes, because tests are done not as a selfish motive of finding how intelligent you are and what your score is. So in the society, based on the different institutions, based on different organizational policies, it is used for different purposes. For example, these tests, assessment tests, are used to classify the students on the basis of their intelligence test scores. They are used for the measurement of learning readiness of students at different age levels. This will help the government to frame the syllabus based on the evolution of students every year. You would see that with every passing year, or at least once in 5 years, the syllabus gets revised. There are additions, there are alterations, there are deletions done. This is because due to the test which is administered as a survey purpose, so that we understand the learning readiness of students and design the syllabus accordingly. Also for selection of subjects, courses and careers. So once you understand in which zone you're very good at, say you're very good at logical reasoning, mathematical ability, numerical ability, you can very well choose a position or a career which is based on that. or you're very creative, your creativity is more, your spatial senses more, you can go for arts, say music, dance, or anything of that sort. So for selection of subject, course and careers, these tests are applied. Also for diagnosis of reading inability and educational backwardness, this is mostly used to rule out students who are not able to remain up to the mark at each grade. They have some learning disabilities. Rather than keeping them aloof or isolated or insulting them that they are behaving as morons, it is our responsibility to bring them back to a level of their intelligence. For that, you should assess the intelligence level. Also for the prediction of future progress of a student. So today the student is so with such and such strength and weakness. So how do you predict the future progress of a student can be done based on these assessments. Also for the different services, selection of candidates for officers training or for any other career can be done through assessment. Also the ascertaining of the magnitude of individual difference. So this is how we come with a community based assessment, telling that this population is more intelligent than the other population, or people with this socio-economic strata are said to be more intelligent, or people with this kind of nutritional pattern are said to be more intelligent when compared to the people who are in metropolitan cities with a junk food eating habits. So these variations can be certain, the magnitude of that difference can be ascertained by way of application of various intelligence tests. Also the prediction for vocational success of student in an occupational life, the preparation for a case study report, etc. can be done when the appropriate test is administered to the appropriate population. A comparative study of the students may also be made, also providing educational, vocational and personal guidance to the students can be done, especially when you are a mentor, you are a teacher, you are in a position to mold somebody. These tests will be of great help so that their vocational growth, their personal growth, their educational growth, their professional growth can be tamed in a better way when the tests are administered and you understand where the lacuna is and what kind of training has to be given to them. So this is the complete overview of different intelligence tests, the purpose of it and how we apply it. If you are a person of receiving the intelligence test or you are a person of giving intelligence test or administering intelligence test to a person so that you can serve them in a better way. So with this we will be concluding today's session where the application of tests, the different tests is done with. Based on this, our next sessions would be to provide different evidences to make you understand how yoga is really going to work out in the lacunas, in the weak points, and how you can enhance your intelligence based on these tests, based on the theories, based on the different definitions, based on the factors which can influence your intelligence. Hope today's session was clear and you had understood the different tests you can undertake at different levels of your age and how you can understand where you lack it and how you can enhance your intelligence based on the weaker points. So you can recap the test once again with the group test and the individual test, both verbal and the non-verbal, and remember how you can do it in the future days. Thank you for listening to this session. We will meet again for the next module with a new topic.